Hey, my name is Milad. I work for the CLF National. So since I have a lot of the slides, switched into this deck here, so I try to be on time, and I may just breeze through some of these slides because I'm pretty sure you're all aware of most of the things I'm going to talk about. So this is part of the project that we worked with NREL mostly, and it was funded by NREL. And I'm just going to give you a very quick overview of our findings from that project. So I start with a very broad introduction. I go over some backgrounds, although I know most of you in this call are aware of these terms that I'm going to use. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how end of life is being modeled in whole building LCA tools and the feedback we received from practitioners from the two activities that we've done with them, a survey and a workshop. So this is just an overview of the project and who's doing what. Basically, the end goal is to develop a database for end of life data, and Building Transparency and NREL are working mostly on that end. Carbon Leadership Forum's role in that was mostly holding the workshop and getting feedback from the practitioners through a survey and also the workshop that followed that up. And then we have SOM on the team to kind of test out the data set on real buildings. So these are the overarching project goals. And our goal in the workshop was kind of aligned with this too. So our goal was to improve end of life modeling and whole building LCA tools, and we were wondering how building LCA tools currently model it and what is lacking basically, and then we want to explore opportunities for developing an open access end of life database that all the tools can use. And just an acknowledgement that we focused our we'll limit our scope to these 8 materials, but the workshop and the survey were kind of beyond all these materials and were more generic about construction materials. So some background, I'm pretty sure all of you are familiar with LCA. So LCA is the standard method to quantify environmental impacts, and our focus at CLF is, as the name kind of suggests, our focus is on global warming potential, which is measured in units of embodied carbon or, CO2 equivalent. For those of you familiar with LCA consists of basically 4 essential stages, or 4 major stages A, B, C, and D. And, our focus was essentially on stage C impacts, end of life impacts. So whatever happens at the end of life of a product or a system is captured within this module. And, it's really hard to talk about, end of life without mentioning or considering stage D impacts, which are the credits or burdens from basically end of life practices that happen outside the system boundaries. Although, stage D impacts are kind of staying out of the system boundary and they look kind of lonely outside the boundary, we want to kind of have a look on that too, because, most of the benefits, especially from material recoveries, are coming or are accounted for in stage D. And also stage A5 impacts in particular are important because some of the end of life practices happen during this stage, especially when you want to deal with the building on site for like renovation projects or things like that. So A5 also captures some of the end of life impacts, but it's just a different way of accounting for those. So this is just a snapshot of the default end of life scenario likelihoods, as I will call them, or decomposition rates. So that you may hear me using different terms here, but I mean the same thing. So when I talk about like end of life scenario likelihoods or decomposition rates, I'm basically talking about how much of the material at the end of life ends up in either of these basically pathways. So recycling, landfilling, incineration, reuse are probably the most common pathways. So in this one, you can see the end of life scenario likelihoods outlined in both UL environment and the Smart EPD program operator part A for the PCRs. So unfortunately, there isn't much detail here for North America. We basically have detailed recovery rates for steel and aluminum, but then all other materials are grouped together in one big scenario. So as we refine end of life modeling and data in whole building LCA tools, we should also try to harmonize these end-of-life assumptions with EPDs that may be future information sources for project teams using those tools. And this is just from our internal research of kind of trying to find out what happens at the end of life of these 8 materials that we focused in this project. And as you can see, kind of for reuse, we have either limited or no data. So this seems to be a big data gap within the literature or the resources that we explored. And there's some more available data for recycling, incineration, and mostly landfilling. So landfilling has been the focus of end-of-life models and data within the past few decades, I would say. And that's for obvious reasons, because most of the materials end up in landfills. So in this part of the presentation, I go over whole building LCA tools and how they do the modeling of end-of-life. This is just basically a refresher of how a whole building LCA or LCA in general works. It's the 4-step process, and it's iterative. So you start with scoping it out, and you collect material information, BIM models and bill of materials, and then you integrate that with LCI data, lifecycle inventory data. In our case, just end-of-life impacts. And then you produce results, look at results, interpret them, and if there needs to be any modification, you go back to your scope and you basically start this iterative process. So in our study, we mostly looked at these 3 major whole building lifecycle assessment tools, Tally, 1Click LCA, and Athena. So we picked these 3 to just scope it down, first of all. And second of all, we found that most people use these 3 whole building LCA tools in North America. So this is just a table. I know it's a lot of details in here, but what I want you to kind of take a look at and notice is that, some tools like, Tally and Athena combine some of the end-of-life stage impacts, in particular for waste processing, which the actual processing of materials at their end of life and disposal, they're usually combined. Tally combines actually 3 of them and doesn't report on deconstruction and demolition impacts. So there seems to be a data gap here, hindering these tools to fully account for all stages of C impacts. And also some of the functionalities that exist within tools are captured in the bottom, like how many of these end-of-life scenarios do they cover, what flexibilities do they give to the user. As you can see, most of the existing end-of-life models do not let user to adjust anything, basically. So they use either default values or default assumptions. And to gather perspectives on end-of-life modeling, from the practitioners, we conducted a survey, first of all, to collect some information and see how people think and how people usually do end-of-life modeling. And I just want to point out these 2 questions that we asked. One was about how much experience they are with either of these items. Most importantly, the end-of-life modeling outside whole building LCA tools seems to be something that people don't do. So they mostly rely on the whole building LCA tool to do the end-of-life modeling for them. And then we asked participants to kind of rank these tools, these 3 tools that we kind of narrowed down our focus to, on modeling end-of-life. And surprisingly enough, only probably 1 person was satisfied with how the tools currently model end-of-life. And this kind of showed us, there seems to be a lot of room for improvement for whole building LCA tools to improve end-of-life modeling. And another question in the survey, which we got 22 responses for, was that, we asked basically, does end-of-life consideration affect your design? And nearly half of them said yes, it influences their design. And the other half were on the no to some influence spectrum. And they were kind of blaming the end of life not being a major driver of emissions, which is partly true. And also limited reliable data was mentioned a lot. So they were like, the end of life modeling within those tools is not accurate enough for us to influence design decisions. And here are just some of the outcomes from the workshop. So this is basically each of these squares, each of these sticky notes shows, a response from a participant of that workshop. So we got 28 attendees from more than 15 firms. And in this particular activity, we asked people to kind of rank what they want to see in whole building LCA tools. And this is just basically the ranking of the options we gave them. And on the top of that list states choose what if scenarios. So they wanted to have what if scenarios for end of life modeling because they wanted to kind of do end of life modeling at the design stage, and they were wondering like what happens if you use all the materials, what happens if you recycle all materials, and basically doing the scenario based modeling, among other things, as you can see in this chart. So in another question, we picked the top 5 prioritized functionalities, and we asked folks to kind of tell us what data is actually available to do those modelings and what they what do they actually need to do those modelings. And we got some great insights from that. I'm not going to go over all the details. Hopefully, we're going to share the report very soon, and you can find out more details on that. And then we talked about three of the hot end of life topics that we found from the survey. One was on deconstruction and reuse, both practices and data. Biogenic carbon and wood products modeling was brought up a few times, and accounting of existing building on site, basically A5 stage, was also brought up in the survey, and we had some useful discussions about that too. And I'm happy that we have like here to talk to us about biogenic carbon, CLT, and how end of life modeling kind of have effects on that. And some final thoughts. So some major takeaways that we got from this project so far, and it was hard to consolidate all of that into 3 bullet points, but there seems to be a large data gap on certain end-of-life scenarios and for certain materials. And for certain scenarios, I mostly mean reuse. So reuse seems to be the largest gap. And for some materials, mostly wood-based materials, wood products like CLT or glue them, there's less data because, because of many reasons that hopefully we will discuss in this webinar furthermore. And the end-of-life impacts may impact design decisions. So this was something we found from the survey, but practitioners needed more transparent and more accurate data, and also methods. And practitioners basically asked for 2 things the most: default end-of-life decomposition rates or scenarios so that they can pull up for their region, and customizable end-of-life modeling. So they wanted to have the opportunity to customize based on their project level data, which is not usually the case for most of the whole building LCA tools at the moment. So at the end, I came up with these few recommendations. So the first one is on developing an open access end-of-life database for North America. So this is what we are doing in this project, or we're aiming in this project, and hopefully this data set will be, or this database will be available by the end of this project when everything is kind of put together. Another thing is developing regional default end-of-life scenarios. So people love default numbers in tools, and there seems to be a lack of geographic granularity within end-of-life data for most of the whole building LCA tools. And hopefully that would be something we can further work on and develop. And consideration of future uncertainties is brought up also a few times because people were concerned about them not knowing what happens in 50 years to a material or to a building that you build today. So they wanted to see some functionalities in the tools that can actually account for that. And harmonization of end-of-life data and methods is crucial. This is especially crucial regarding policies that are coming up. So if we want to kind of implement those policies, we need harmonized data and methods so that when people use different tools, they can kind of firmly use one and comply with a policy that's coming up. And that's kind of probably the end game or the end goal of doing all this research on collecting data, being regionalized, and giving custom kind of functionalities to folks. All right, with that, I just want to thank you all for listening.